everyone. Good evening. I'm Heather Moran, and I'm the CEO here at Sixth and I. Okay, that's very kind. Whether you're here with us in person or watching virtually from home, thank you for being with us tonight and for supporting a nonprofit. Now, for anyone who's here for the first time, Sixth and I is a center for arts, entertainment, ideas, and Jewish life. And by attending our programs, you help fuel our mission to inspire more meaningful and fulfilling lives. I'd like to thank our promotional partners of this program, the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington, the EDC-JCC, Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Philanthropies, Gather DC, the Den Collective, and Addis Israel Congregation. I know, they're pretty cool. Discussing anti-Semitism can be fraught and overwhelming. It often opens up big questions about Jewish identity, history, and discrimination. So thank you for showing up for this difficult and critical conversation. We are in especially capable hands tonight with our esteemed guest, Sarah Hurwitz. For nearly 15 years, Sarah built a career finding just the right words. She served as a White House speechwriter from 2009 to 2017, first as a senior speechwriter for President Obama, and then as a head speechwriter for Michelle Obama. Prior to working in the White House, Sarah was in the thick of political campaigns, including serving as the chief speechwriter for Hillary Clinton on her 2008 presidential campaign. Her gift for magnetic, thought-provoking, and impactful storytelling is evident on every page of her new book, which brings us all here tonight. As a Jew, explores how anti-Semitism has shaped Jewish identity and how Jews can reclaim the beauty and depth of their tradition. I don't need to share sobering statistics to confirm what most of us here know. Anti-Semitism has reached a record high in this country. We've seen it in this city and, tragically, in this neighborhood. Most Jewish Americans report feeling less safe. And as we know, hate doesn't exist in a vacuum. When extremism is allowed to flourish more broadly, and when democracy is undermined, countless marginalized communities are also at risk. Now, before I bring up Sarah, I see that there are many Jewish communal professionals here in this audience. I want to acknowledge that during these times, our tough jobs are even tougher. As Barry Feinstein, the CEO of the Jim Joseph Foundation, wrote recently in E-Jewish Philanthropy, for Jewish communal professionals, the current situation is not just a news cycle, it's their daily job. There is no escape hatch, no log off and live your life. The very thing that fuels their purpose is now the thing that's draining them. I just want you to know I see you, and our community sees you. And if you work in the Jewish community or you're a professional, if you work in the Jewish community, I'd love for you to rise so we can thank you for your work. Now, speaking of someone who tirelessly and passionately works for our community, I am so pleased that Rabbi Aaron Potek will be moderating this discussion with his friend Sarah. Rabbi Aaron is the Senior Rabbi and Executive Director of Jewish Life at Sixth and I have the honor of working with him every day. I am in awe of the gravity of the work that he holds, how he both challenges and supports the hearts and minds of the 20s and 30s that we serve, and how he helps people explore their Jewish identity with integrity and compassion. So thank you all for being here tonight, and please help me give Sarah Hurwitz and Rabbi Aaron Potek a warm Sixth and I welcome.
Hello, Sarah.
Hello, Aaron.
It's weird to be interviewing a friend, but here we are. We'll make this formal. I have questions. So I believe we did this, it was, how many years ago was this?
It was like 6 years ago.
I was about to say 6 years ago. I was like, it couldn't have been 6 years ago. 6 years ago for your first book, which was a joy and was in the social hall, so we've really upgraded
we have.
to the big space. I know you described as like a love letter to Judaism, whereas the second book, if I may say, is a little more fiery and full of some hot takes. That not that your first book didn't have hot takes, but like I think your first book was a little more gentle, and here you let it go. And I'm curious. I guess I'm curious to hear a little more about like what made you decide to switch from love letter to what some are describing as a polemic type book. Just tell me a little bit about that process.
So first of all, it is such a pleasure to be here. I love Six and I. I am so grateful to them for having us. I'm so grateful to all the organizations that co-sponsored, and I'm really grateful to you. I mean, Aaron, you were one of my first teachers of Judaism 10 years ago when I first started learning, and you have been like my teacher and my rabbi and my friend since then.
That's
so
nice.
I adore you, and I can't think of a better person to be doing this book launch event with. So thank you.
Book launch event.
Book launch
Woo!
event, guys. It's happening. It's happening. So, my first book was a love letter. Like it was, 10 years ago. I grew up like many American Jews, like pretty disengaged. Didn't really find much in the tradition, and then randomly started learning in my mid-30s and like could not believe what I'd found. I was just so blown away by it. And I remember thinking like, why was it that the Judaism I grew up with was like 4 holidays, 2 texts, like the prayer book I held in my hand and the Torah with the wrinkly scroll thing on the front of the synagogue, and like a few universalist values, like, help the poor, don't kill, etc. And I really like thought like, actually studying Judaism, I was like, wait, where was this all of my life? Like, why didn't I see this? And why was my Jewish identity just so profoundly apologetic? I spent so many years of my life being like, well, I'm Jewish, but I'm not that Jewish. I'm just a cultural Jew, which is a beautiful way to be Jewish, but I knew nothing about Jewish history, thought, literature, art, culture. Or I was like, social justice is my Judaism, which again is beautiful if you actually know what Judaism says about social justice. I did not. And so, I had this identity that was like a series of caveats and apologies. And, I wrote my first book, and it was like just this love letter. And then a few things happened between then and now. The first is that I started training to be a hospital chaplain, just as a volunteer. And I want to just pause on the word chaplain. Like, when I tell people I'm doing this, they're like, but you're Jewish. It's like chaplain is Christian, right? No, chaplaincy is open to people of all faiths, but, it's sort of many things that are actually Christian are sort of deemed to be universal. So when I was doing my training, I was told, prayer is, God, please heal my friend Aaron, who's right here and can hear me praying out loud for him spontaneously, which, like, beautiful. Jews generally don't pray like that, but I was told, like, no, you should pray for Jews like that, Christians, that's universal prayer. I thought, like, I really thought about Judaism in Christian terms. Even the idea of spirituality, I'd always thought like body, carnal, degraded, bad, spirit, good, incorporeal, lovely. You should try to transcend your body for spirit world. That's not a Jewish idea, but I just thought that's what spirituality was. And as I trained as a chaplain, I remember bringing a woman a Bible one day, this lovely Christian woman, and when I came back, she was like reading it, and she was so moved. She was so comforted. And I just thought, like, man, if you ever tried to read the Torah that way, like, it would not be moving and comforting, but that's what I used to do. I would, like, sit down and be like, what? This God is smiting people? This is terrible. Like, but that's not how we read our sacred text. So, Christian hegemony. The second thing was I visited a college campus probably a year before October 7th, and the students there at the Hillel, the Jewish Students Organization, were all asking me about anti-Semitism. And I was like, sorry, what? Like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like, I never dealt with this in college. Like, what are you actually talking about? And they were so stunned. It was like they almost didn't believe me. And so the question I had asked years ago of like, oh, where has this been all my life? I really began to ask more seriously, like, why was the Judaism I grew up with so oddly edited? Why did I have this kind of apologetic, kind of grovelly, kind of diminished Jewish identity? What actually was happening there? And this book was kind of an effort to find answers to those questions.
All right, let's get into the answers of those questions. And obviously, I assume most people here haven't read your book because it just came out today. So
Probably not.
So can you give us like an overview of what some of those answers to those questions that you were asking, like what answers did you find?
So what I found, and it's kind of a little bit of a downer, is that, my Jewish identity had very much been infiltrated and warped by 2,000 years of anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism, and by 200 years of Jews desperately trying to escape that persecution by erasing ourselves, by assimilating, by blending in, by leaving behind parts of our traditions that the majority thought were disgusting. And, realizing this, I was like, oh my God, I have so many layers of shame and self-hatred. My identity has been so profoundly distorted, both by hatred and just by the distorting feature of living in a majority Christian country where I was just thinking in Christian, speaking, thinking. I was looking at Judaism through a Christian lens. And so this book was my effort to try to just strip away those layers, to actually really discern and name and strip them away, and to be able to reclaim Judaism on Jewish terms, to be able to see it not with disdain, not with an anti-Jewish lens, but actually with curiosity and open-heartedness, and to begin to reclaim these traditions that, in some ways have been lost.
And so I want to get into some of these specifics, but just to kind of drill down a little bit, is what you're saying that a large part of your own sort of self-hatred or self-disdain a result of almost, there's a term thrown around like internalized anti-Semitism. Not to reduce your entire book to that, but are you saying that a large reason that maybe so many Jews sort of do feel that inner shame or embarrassment is a result of internalized anti-Semitism?
Yeah, I think there is. I think that is a really big component. It's not the whole thing, but I think that it's so much bigger than I realized. Doing this, actually diving into history, actually doing this work, it was much more significant than I'd thought.
Okay, so you just said history. Let's get into the history because, I think some people, even myself included, I'm not a history expert. I know some of the big hits, if you will, of anti-Semitism in the past 2,000 years, but I'm curious what... This isn't being
recorded. There's an album, actually, of greatest hits. It's a great listen.
So, yeah, I guess let's start, because you talk about it, I can't remember the exact title of their chapter, but about the mystery of anti-Semitism and how your whole life you kind of thought this is just sort of a thing that anti-Semitism exists and it's always been there, and then that's actually not what you found in your learning, in your deep dive of that history. So can you help us understand a little bit what you found?
Yeah, so I think for me, for I think many young Jewish people, my anti-Semitism education was Holocaust education. That's what I learned, and I learned that the Germans lost World War I and they blamed the Jews, and then the Depression happened and they blamed the Jews, and then they killed them. And I was like, okay, yeah, that sounds right. But then if you're wait, but why the Jews? It's because of prejudice and scapegoating. And you're oh, okay. It's wait, I'm sorry, but why the Jews? Because of prejudice and scapegoating. That's what we're learning about. And you're okay. And you kind of walk away with two impressions. Number one, it's kind of a mystery, right? Anti-Semitism is just this eternal mystical thing kind of baked into the order of the universe. And the second thing that I kind of walked away with was maybe we did something to deserve this? If all these Germans, all these Europeans thought we were terrible, I don't know, maybe. But actually, when I dove into the history, I realized anti-Semitism is the least mysterious phenomenon in the known universe. It is so utterly unmysterious. There is anti-Semitism, of course, that dates back to ancient times, thousands of years ago, but I think that many of the themes and tropes we see today really originated in early Christianity, when the church in early centuries was working to define itself against Judaism. Because I didn't really know this, maybe some of you know this, but the New Testament is about two groups of Jews arguing with each other. They split. One remains Jewish, the other becomes Christians. And as this new sort of group of Christians is evolving, there are people kind of doing both. And these early church fathers were we got to distinguish ourselves. And there's this very early tradition called the Inversus Judaeus tradition of defining Christianity against Judaism. And you see very early on these themes of Jewish power, the idea that Jews are just diabolically, superhumanly powerful. Jewish depravity. Jews are just so perverse, so utterly disgusting and bad and evil, and conspiracy. They may be small in numbers, but they're working together to hurt you. And you begin to kind of see these themes work their way through history, leading to the kind of anti-Semitism that led to the Holocaust, which, by the way, none of this is my original thinking. All of this is the work of really excellent Christian scholars who have been doing this kind of work for years, and I'm very grateful to them for really diving into this history. And so when I began to understand that, I just thought oh, wait a second. This is so incredibly systemic and deep and profound. And, while definitely in recent decades, all the major Christian denominations have done tremendous work to disavow historic anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism, and especially the Catholic Church, which I think is a big deal. These things still linger. When every Sunday at church you're learning about the Pharisees and how depraved they are and how soulless and how unspiritual, it's like these grooves are still kind of being worn, and I think it's something that we need to be aware of.
So, and you write about this in your book, sort of, because there's two pieces you're getting at. One is just this general framework, which I don't know if it was yours, but the powerful, depraved, and conspiracy is kind of like three main frameworks for thinking about anti-Semitism. But then what you're also saying is just sort of how these all find deep roots in Christianity. You spoke to this just a little bit, but like, and this is going to put you in a bit of a weird spot, but it's just like, where does that leave us sort of like in this like Christian majority country in terms of like how we think about our Christian friends, our Christian neighbors, it's like a awkward thing to talk about. It
is an awkward thing to talk about, but I do think, so many Christian leaders today and so many scholars are talking about it, right? Like I got all of this stuff from all of these amazing people who were doing this work, and there's like many, many committees and movements within Christianity to do this work. So it's not like some secret that we can't speak of.
Breaking the news.
Right, exactly. And I should also say, my book is very much about American Jews who have, most American Jews have roots in Europe and so are shaped by this history. But many Jews do not have roots in Europe. They have roots in Africa and Asia. So if we were talking about Jews in other countries, this would be maybe a little bit, it would be more complex. There are other aspects, but when I'm looking at American Judaism, this is one of the forces I see shaping us.
So you spend the next chapter after talking about sort of this like Christian hegemony and Christian anti-Semitism, talking about sort of our own response to that anti-Semitism. And I'm curious to hear sort of your analysis of how you understand Jews having reacted to this and how we've, again, potentially internalized it or had it affect our own self-understanding.
Yeah. So again, I feel like there's an Ashken normativity to this that makes me very uneasy, but I am writing about my own ancestors and about American Jews who do largely have history in Europe. So, I go back to the 1800s in Europe where people are beginning to gain citizenship in their countries. We now have countries, people are becoming citizens, including Jews, but Jews are kind of a problem because Jews before the 1800s in Europe lived in these insular communities where they were just living by Jewish law. Their communities were led by Jews. They lived by a Jewish calendar, spoke Jewish languages, ate Jewish food. You weren't like a Frenchman of the Jewish religion. You were just a Jew. And now suddenly this Jewish question arises. It's like, wait a second. Can these people be Frenchmen when really they're Jews and they keep talking about their nation of Israel and next year in Jerusalem? It's like, And there's this whole Jewish question, this debate. And Jews who understandably really wanted to take advantage of the modern world realized we need a way to be Jewish that lets us be part of the broader society. And so you see an effort to make Judaism into more of a Protestant style of religion. You see an argument that's no, guys, we're just like you. We just go to a different church. Judaism's a religion like Christianity. You have your church and we have our synagogue, like our Jew church. You pray in your church, we pray in ours. You have God, we have God. You have the Old Testament, so do we. We actually wrote it. It's so great. Amazing.
Some would say God wrote it, but it's for a different book talk.
And we really emphasize, look, we are a religion of prophetic morality. We're just like you. And blowing on a shofar, a ram's horn? No, that's disgusting. That's very uncivilized. Stomping on a glass at a wedding, please, no. And look at the stained glass we have made here. And what I realize is that in some way, these true fact, they really made their synagogues look like churches. It was amazing. But, in some ways, first of all, what they were doing was quite courageous. They could have just decided, let's go be Christians. It'll make our lives easy. They could have said, we'll be nothing. But they said, no, we want to still be Jews. We got to figure out how to do this. We're loyal to this tradition. But in some ways, they kind of took a Protestant cookie cutter, jammed it into Judaism, and got rid of a lot of what didn't fit. And I think a lot of what didn't fit that I discovered 10 years ago was 2,500 years of our texts after the Hebrew Bible, after the Tanakh, the Torah. That's kind of the only text I think most Jews have ever heard of, the Torah. But we have 2,500 years of commentary and debate that is the beating heart of Jewish tradition. It is you can't just sit down and read the Torah and be that's the Judaism. It's we've spent 2,500 years reimagining this, and to rip that beating heart out of Judaism, I think, is kind of a tragic loss. And it's funny, I was talking to a bunch of Israelis about this, and this guy raised his hand, and he's like, this happened to us. And I was like, no, it didn't. You don't understand me. Stop. And then he interrupted again. And he said, this happened to us. And I was like, dude. And then I stopped and I thought, like, oh my God, the early Zionists, if you look at early Zionist thinkers, they are in many ways just as dismissive and degrading of Jewish texts and traditions as these reformer Jews in the 1800s. You know, you see these early Zionists who are like, ugh, our rabbis with their crazy superstitious religion, waiting for the Messiah to save us. No, we need to reject all this nonsense and become more secular, become Zionists. And it kind of broke my heart because I was like, oh, they've lost it too. You know, you talk to secular Israelis and there's a sense that like they've lost something too. And so I think just realizing like, oh, the Judaism I grew up with, it was a little oddly edited. It did kind of in some ways take a Protestant form. And I think there's been an effort in recent decades to reclaim the things we've lost. You've really seen a return in many parts of the Jewish world to kind of returning to our texts, returning to our traditions. And I think that is really important.
So you know my own background where, I grew up Orthodox and I've actually rejected a lot of it. So in some ways, I'm coming to this from like an interesting place. And so if I can push you a tiny bit, like, I guess there's a lot of stuff that is weird and offensive in our tradition. And so
Totally.
I guess like where's the line between like editing things out, evolving the tradition, which you speak so beautifully, both in your previous book and this book, is a cornerstone of Judaism, is that we're not locked into the Bible. We evolve and we expand and we interpret. Like, I guess where's the line of like that versus we're just trying to fit in with our Christian neighbors?
Right. I think here's my secret dream. I wish we could go back 220 years to that moment where we were like becoming citizens. But we could go back without our hearts being colonized by anti-Judaism, without our hearts being shaped by the disdain and disgust of our neighbors. I wish we could just go back with total open-heartedness, curiosity, love, appreciation, a sense that our ancestors have wisdom to give us, and that we could kind of look at our tradition through those eyes. And if we had, the question is, what would we have created? Orthodoxy was also a modern invention, my friend. Like, it was a reaction to these reformers, right? So I actually almost think it's as much, it sort of bears as much the stamp of that difficult moment as do other types of Judaism. So it's like, that's kind of my dream. And luckily, my dream is coming true because there are like thousands of Jewish organizations, leaders, thinkers, rabbis who are doing exactly this work right now. Like, we're living in this incredible Jewish renaissance, and I think you're one of them, who are doing that work of like going back to the text and being like, okay, forget what like this person said about this. Like, what can we get from this now? I think that's the trick. Yeah,
I mean, in a way, what you're really talking about, which I don't think you said in your book explicitly, but is like you're really hoping for informed choice, like, which is for those knowing people in the audience, is like was a core tenet of Reform Judaism back in the day. But like really wanting people to make these from, and maybe adding in, and this you do say in your book, like this sort of freeness. You use the word hefker, which is this sort of like unowned, like being able to really reclaim our Judaism without all that like added baggage that may have affected that editing process.
Exactly. Like I don't. People are always like, so what's the right way to practice Judaism? I'm like, I have no idea. But I know the wrong way, which is to do it how I used to do it, knowing nothing and kind of making fun of it, right? Like, I think we have to get the basics. I think we have to wrap our mind around some of the content, and then you do you. You'll probably come up with something amazing. I'm not here to tell you that, but I think the contentless Judaism that I used to have, I think is not a way to do it.
Okay, so let's transition to what I imagine is going to be some of the harder responses and parts of the book, which is around anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, which you explicitly say in the book you hate that conversation. But anyway, here we are.
Here we are. Let's just do it.
So let's start with, after October 7th, you went on kind of like a world tour of Hillels all across the country, I guess nation tour. Tell me, like, what you found there, what you found on campuses that sort of alarmed you to the point that you devoted a significant chunk of the book to it. Yeah.
I mean, I found it horrifying. And I should say campuses are very diverse. So to say that campus is X is nonsensical, right? Campuses have all kinds of atmospheres. But the ones that I went to that were the worst, what I found was that Israel had been put in the same bucket as the KKK and the Nazi Party. So if I were like, Aaron, I'm a Nazi, but I'm a liberal Nazi. Or like, yeah, I'm in the KKK, but I'm not racist. It's like, that's nonsense. Like, no, these are entities that you could have no contact with. They are just inherently evil. And to see Israel, which is a country, messy, has all of the problems of the country, to see it put in that bucket, it means that there is no room for discussion or debate, right? And, the students I met had very nuanced, complicated, and often quite critical views of Israel. They were very critical of the current government, as am I. Very critical of the occupation, of the continuation of the war. I mean, they had very complex relationships with Israel. But again, that's like I'm a Nazi, but okay, I don't like this Nazi policy. It's like, you can't have that, right? So it just struck me how a kid walking across campus wearing a T-shirt that said Israel, you can't do that. I mean, the students were very clear with me, like, please do not ever do that. But if their classmates were walking around with a shirt that said China, if a Chinese American student had a shirt that said China, I don't think their classmates would be like, oh, well, she clearly loves the fact that they're interning 1 million Muslim Uyghurs in camps. Look at her, what a monster. I think most people would look at her and say, like, okay, I guess she probably disagrees with that, but she maybe has a connection to the country. Maybe she has family there. Maybe she studied there. I think they would be given the benefit of the doubt because that's a country. I think I was also surprised by how I had to go through this whole ridiculous litany with them, where they'd say, okay, well, yeah, I can't wear my Israel shirt, but it's okay, it's not that bad. And I'd be like, if a black classmate told you, it's not bad for black students here, but I can't wear my Black Lives Matter t-shirt, what would you say? They're like, well, that's obviously racism. I'm like, okay, cool. Queer student says they can't wear their pride t-shirt. What's that? They're like, homophobia. I'm like, okay, we're getting there. It's like, can we just, like, when the majority is telling the minority how they can express their identity, I think we have a problem. And so, I sometimes get this weird gaslighting from people where they're like, oh, Sarah, that's not true. The kids are just, people are just critical of Israel on campus, and these Jewish kids are being oversensitive. And look, first of all, these Jewish kids are super critical. But second of all, like, there's a difference between slurs and unfounded charges and actual criticism. Saying, like, from water to water, Palestine shall be Arab, or Israelis are Nazis. Like, is that really criticism? If it is, I would just ask you to consider if a Jewish student said, from water to water, Israel shall be Jewish, and Palestinians are terrorists, you think that's criticism? I don't. I think that's racism and eliminationism, and it's disgusting. So, like, why are we, like, I think we're a little confused about what's criticism and what is just accusations and slurs. And so I really wish there were more criticism on campus because I think that would make for really important and good conversation, but that is not often what I saw.
And so I think, and you wrote about this, it's when you say it's not that criticism, it's kind of moved into this category of just like good versus evil, like there's really no room for nuance. How did you see those Jewish students sort of existing in that environment or atmosphere? Because that's like obviously not.
Yeah, it was, some of them are really struggling, but a lot of them were really resilient. And what actually kind of inspired me is, like, unlike their classmates, they couldn't just throw a tantrum and have their feelings be heard. It was like, oh, you're upset, like, spare us your Jewish tears, you oppressor, right? It was like a sense of, like, please decenter your oppressor story, which is horrible, but, like, as a result, they just spend a lot of time listening to other people's stories, which I actually think is great. And they spend a lot of time, because they can't just throw a tantrum, they spend a lot of time, like, getting their facts straight and actually making sure they know what they're talking about, because, like, their classmates will not just accept what they say. So they really actually had to think and challenge themselves and be kind of self-critical, which is called getting an education, which is nice. Like, I'm glad that they are getting that. I wish it were more common. But I saw them doing that, and it made me feel very proud. And I'm sad. Like, it's not okay. But I was very impressed by how many of them responded.
We'll jump to right-wing anti-Semitism in a minute, because I know that's
Please.
something that you, yeah. But before we do, I guess I am curious, I am sure you've heard the argument that there's many Jews are leading the anti-Zionist camps and are leading these protests. And so I guess, how does that fit in with your narrative, which, again, I guess we haven't said explicitly, but you lay out in your book pretty clearly, is like, this is just sort of the modern iteration of this age-old anti-Semitism. How does that fit in?
It's a great question. So it is true. I remember talking to a bunch of students at a conference, and I just learned that at one campus, the student president of Students for Justice in Palestine, which was, this is an organization that was like kind of having like celebratory protests right after October 7th, which I was like, that doesn't feel like criticism. And I heard that on one campus, a Jew was the head of it. And I told these like big group of Jewish students, I was like, you guys, I just heard this wild thing. And I told them, and they looked at me like I was a total idiot. And one of them was like, yeah, my campus too, my campus. And like half the kids there. And I was like, oh boy, okay, that's interesting. I think what we're seeing here, I do think some of these kids are legitimately criticizing Israel. Some of these Jewish students have legitimate criticisms. I have legitimate criticisms, which I spend a lot of late nights anguishing about. I'm very, very critical of this current government. I cannot stand them. I think they are just appalling. But I think that sometimes what I saw is a kind of anti-Semitism that Dara Horn writes beautifully about in her book, People Love Dead Jews, that I think the students were a little bit confused about. She says that, like, we're used to this kind of anti-Semitism that is the Holocaust. Jews are bad, we kill them, nothing they can do to be good. There's another kind, though, that says, yep, Jews are bad, but there is something they can do to be good, which is they can reject whatever it is about Jewish civilization that we, the majority, find disgusting. So, centuries ago, it was reject Jewish religion, convert to Christianity, then you're saved. Maybe, we'll see. It didn't always work out so well. In my grandparents' and parents' generation, it was reject your name, reject your nose, reject your Jewiness. Just don't be so Jewy. Be more waspy, more civilized, more polite, and then you can join my country club or my law firm. Today, the problem isn't the Jews' religion or name or nose. Today, the problem is the Jews' nation. It's really Israel. And it's not enough just to criticize Israel. It's not enough to oppose policies, ideologies, government leaders. It's like Israel cannot exist as an entity. And so, on campus, a lot of kids I found, they were kind of being told, reject your Zionism and then you'll be a good Jew. If you do that, you are the kind of Jew who we can accept in our progressive clubs. And I think what unnerved me is I would sometimes just see this taking on this kind of conversion narrative where these kids were like, growing up, my rabbi and my parents told me Israel's amazing and wonderful. And then I got to campus and I learned that it's actually like this colonialist, genocidal state. And I had an epiphany. Like I saw the light and I took anti-colonialism and anti-racism into my heart and I became an anti-Zionist and now I'm saved. And their classmates were like, yes, now you're saved. And I just found that so historically resonant and also just like so deeply devastating. I found that kind of painful to watch. And I'll say, I was talking to a young person recently who was telling me that for many kids, Zionism equals support of Bibi, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich occupation. That is Zionism. And I got so huffy. I was like, how dare you? That's not true. How could they say that? But I gotta tell you, I took a breath and I was like, if they see a Jewish community that has a kind of a no daylight policy from those individuals and those entities, if they don't see criticism, is it so crazy that they've come to think that that is Zionism and that their only option is anti-Zionism? Like if they do not see a kind of liberal Zionism that says, oh no, those things are not Zionism, that is disgusting, I'm opposed to those things, here's what Zionism is, here's what has to change for Zionism to be what it's meant to be. If they don't, I think we have some responsibility here as well. And, criticism is really, it's risky. You give people an inch, they take a million miles, but I really worry. I just worry that the calculus has kind of shifted now, and if so many people, young people, if that's what they're being told Zionism is, we're not totally blameless in that.
Yeah, and so just to clarify, meaning the more that we've conflated Zionism with the current government, the current war, the more that it's kind of like, well, what other option do some of these anti-Zionists?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I really try when I say to students, I'm trying to say, and right now when I'm promoting this book, I am a Zionist. By that I mean, I believe that Jews have a right to a country in their ancestral homeland. I believe that they have a right to self-determination and national independence, as Latvians do in Latvia and Japanese people do in Japan, and as I think Palestinians should have in Palestine. So, and the reason why I think that is because I know history. And we ran that experiment of Jewish statelessness for 2,000 years, and it didn't go great. And you don't have to go back to the Crusades to know this. I would look at the 20th century. There's the obvious example of the Holocaust wiping out 2/3 of European Jews. But what many people don't know is that there used to be nearly 1 million Jews living in Arab lands. In the 20th century, 850,000 of them had to flee because they were persecuted. 650,000 of them went to Israel.
There used to be 2 million Jews living in Russia. They were persecuted and they fled, 1 million to Israel. There used to be tens of thousands of Ethiopian Jews living in Ethiopia. They were persecuted. They fled to Israel. This all happened in the mid to late 20th century. That is why we need Zionism. That is why we need Israel. And I think the more that you can deliver that message with a very strong critique of this current government and what is happening right now and many of the policies, I think that is a message we should be sending.
So let's shift to... The fact that they didn't clap at any of your other answers means they hated every one of those.
Hated everything else, guys.
Just translating the applause.
So
for you.
harsh. Tough crowd. Okay, fine.
So now let's shift to right-wing anti-Semitism.
Please, thank you.
No applause. Okay. I guess I don't have such a sophisticated question other than just like, I think that sometimes going back to some of the blame that you said Jewish institutions take, like I think there's such a fixation on left-wing anti-Semitism, and we forget that like Trump is president, and like that there are people like platforming Tucker Carlson, as you write in your book, like platforming just crazy anti-Semitism.
Yes.
So can you just talk a little bit about right-wing anti-Semitism and how we should not be forgetting about that? Yeah.
I deplore the people who say, oh, the real problem is on the other side. I deplore that. It is absolutely wrong. You know, I look at the right today, and I see this ideology, this populist ideology that says, this is like kind of a MAGA ideology of a small group of very powerful, very depraved elites are in a conspiracy to harm you and your family. You know, they want to impose their perverse ideas about gender and sexuality and vaccines and all this stuff. They are conspiring to harm you. That is literally the same structure of anti-Semitism. And the leap between elites and Jews is like a millimeter, right? Tucker Carlson has made the leap. People on the right are making that leap. So let's just be super clear about that. I also want to say that anti-Semitism, you know, we sometimes think of it as like a personal prejudice, like Jews are gross and cheap and crass and ugly, and I don't want to be friends with them. Guys, like, that's just not the most predominant kind of anti-Semitism we see today. What we see today, which this amazing scholar named Bernard Harrison writes about in his book, Blaming the Jews, we see a kind of political anti-Semitism, which says, we, the majority, are engaged in this grand moral project, and the only thing stopping us are the Jews. The Jews are actually the representation of the bad thing that we are trying to eliminate. So back in the day, it was we, the Christians, are Christianizing the Roman Empire. Only thing stopping us, these Jews who won't convert. Then it was we, the communists, are bringing about the brotherhood of man, the great revolution. Who's stopping us? These capitalist Jews. In Germany, in the mid-20th century, it was we, the Germans, are bringing about this great racially pure, Aryan, super race fatherland. The only thing stopping us, these race-polluting Jews. Today, you see this exact same thing on the right and the left. On the right, it takes the form of we, white Christian Americans, are bringing white Christian civilization back to America. The only thing stopping us are these Jews who are importing black and brown immigrants to take the place of white people. That is the great replacement conspiracy. It is, I don't know whether it's more racist or more anti-Semitic, but it's an ugly lie that has become very common on the right. That is there. And then on the left, it's, you know, we, the grand moral majority, we are bringing about anti-colonialism and anti-racism, and the only thing stopping us are these racist, colonialist Zionists, which is kind of a polite way of saying Jews. So, like, this is very much on both sides, and I think, you know, watching our president dine with, like, notorious anti-Semites, watching the right, you know, watching young... I've just listened to a devastating podcast about how young men are being drawn into this like manosphere online that is super anti-Semitic. So this is, on, as my friend Dara Horn says, like if you think there are sides here, you are very confused.
Being here in Washington, D.C., you know, I'm assuming we're probably not among a lot of people who are going to be objecting to your critique of right-wing anti-Semitism. Do you have a sense of what can we do or should we do in this moment where I think right-wing anti-Semitism, unlike left-wing anti-Semitism, actually has the president's office, the power, the Congress, like it just feels like it's more baked into power structures that feel more out of reach. I don't know if you share that assumption, but...
I'm not sure I share it because I think I worry that the left-wing anti-Semitism has really it has these very weird tendrils in a lot of elite institutions that are kind of training the next generation of government leaders. You know, like I've heard this argument. It's like, oh, it's worse on the right because they're the ones in power now. But there is a different kind of cultural power that I think that the left has, and I just think they're both pernicious and dangerous in different ways. So I can't look. I would love to say the other side is worse because I'm a Democrat. Like, shocker. I tend to be on the left, but I just, unfortunately, I can't say that.
Thank you. So let's get towards the end of your book. You offer frameworks for how to think about anti-Semitism. We already alluded to them. I'm curious, again, obviously people should read your book, but just as a teaser, sort of what are some of those frameworks that can help people think about it? I'll leave that there.
Yeah, so one is the social versus political anti-Semitism, which I think is very, it's the personal prejudice versus we, the great majority, are doing this moral project. The second one is that kind of that eliminationist kind of anti-Semitism versus the conversionist kind that I kind of saw on campus with young people. A third thing just to think about is that anti-Semitism gets upgrades, and that's what makes it so confusing. The medieval clergyman did not think himself a bigot. The guy had centuries worth of very sophisticated theology saying that Jews were depraved. They killed Jesus. I mean, centuries and centuries of I've read this stuff. It is it's a hot take. I mean, it's really strong language. So he wasn't I'm a dumb bigot. He was the elite. He was very educated. So not bigotry, sophistication. Several centuries later, the enlightened, university-educated European gentleman, he would never say that Jews killed Jesus. That was medieval religious superstition and nonsense. The Enlightenment had done away with that. Now we were enlightened, and now we had science. And science said that Jews were racially inferior. That's what the science said, guys. You could learn it at the university, right? That guy was not some superstitious, Christian anti-Semite who said that Jews killed Jesus. Of course not. That guy had science. That was what the enlightened, sophisticated, educated people thought. And today, again, the problem is not the Jews' religion, it's not their race, it is their nation. And, and it takes on a very elite and kind of highly educated tone, right? It's Israel shouldn't exist, and here's why, and post-colonialism and the semiotics, the law, you need a PhD to you need to read all these very sophisticated books to understand this, so it seems sophisticated, right? It seems very sophisticated. No one on a college campus is going to say that Jews killed Jesus. No one on a college campus is going to say that Jews are racially inferior. I mean, they wouldn't dream of it. But when you get into this, Israel's the bloodthirsty original sin of all nations, blah, 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 and this very sophisticated language, it sounds sophisticated. And I think the problem is when you're in the upgrade, it's very hard to recognize it for what it is. And so I could understand why students on campus were just so confused. I think it's hard to recognize the upgrade when you're in it. And I do wonder if maybe 10 or 20 years from now, we'll look back and be like, wow, that was not great.
You end your book, what I would say, kind of a callback to your first book in a way.
It was.
Oh, nice, got that one. With I don't even, solutions doesn't feel like the right word, but some opportunities for what Jews today living should do. And again, without giving away that whole chapter, can you share a little bit of sort of, I guess your response to all of this, which is obviously heavier material, what's your hope and wish for maybe Jewish folks here or Jews reading your book all across the world? Yeah,
I mean, I think the way this question often gets asked to me is okay, you've just talked about anti-Semitism, how do we fight anti-Semitism? And I get this, there's this weird self-flagellation we do, which is guys, if we just had the right campaign, the right PR campaign, if we just came up with the right tweet, then we would finally fight anti-Semitism. It's really us, we're failing to fight this. And part of me just thinks that's adorable. The ambition there is just so charming because there are 16 million of us, with an M. That's literally the size of the 5th largest city in China. We are not even the largest Chinese city. We're just a city. And there are 8 billion other people in the world. And this idea that we're going to control what 8 billion people think is just again, the ambition is it's so charming to me, but it's not true. And I think historically, anti-Semitism has come and gone when the plague arises, when the economy crashes, and people kind of need someone to blame. And there's a neural groove that says oh, these people, right? This is pretty convenient. So it tends to kind of come and go when things are good or bad. I mean, the 80-year vacation that we had from history here in America, that was super fun. I went to college during that time, loved it. that was a pretty good time. Like liberalism was flourishing, right? Like our economy was actually pretty good for a lot of that time. And I think now with globalization, with the rise of technology, just a lot of things have kind of crashed and people are feeling very scared and insecure. So look, I appreciate the organizations that are trying to educate people and fight anti-Semitism. I think that's wonderful. I would give a special shout out to Dara Horn, who has a new organization called The Living Tell, where her solution is to actually educate young people about Jewish civilization in schools, about Jews and Jewish civilization, not just like dying like Holocaust Jews, but actually living Jews and what they've done. I think that is amazing. But I also think like instead of us trying to continually bail out this tsunami and this flood with buckets, I think we need to build an ark. And I think to me that arc is being proud, passionate, committed, serious Jews, however that looks, right? And, what I used to tell the kids on campus is like, a lot of campus clubs on some of these schools have kind of a no Zionists allowed policy, even if whether it's formal or informal, it's like, oh, you're one of those Zionists, like, it's not going to be a fun club for you to join. And I said to them, look, if the Climate Change Club, which, definitely needs a foreign policy, if they won't let you be in their club, then start your own climate change club, and please make it open to anyone, not just Jews, people of any background, any political belief, and just do climate change. Don't do Israel or anti-Zionism, just do climate change and make that club awesome. Make that club the most inclusive, effective club your campus has ever seen. That is what Jews have done in America, right? Like when people excluded us from their law firms, hospitals, universities, we founded our own, and they became awesome, and we welcomed in anyone who wanted to work with us. And now everyone wants to join. And I kind of wonder if maybe we're at a point where we might need to do that again. Because I think at the end of the day, we got very comfortable in America, but I don't think the key point of being a Jew is to be comfortable. Like if anything, kind of our value proposition to the world has been discomfort. Like when we came along and we were like, hey guys, monotheism. Didn't go great. Like people were not thrilled about that. That was not comfortable. When we said actually every human being is created in God's image, including like that stranger, that slave, it was like not hugely popular, right? But like that's kind of what we have to offer. And so I think actually being comfortable shouldn't be the goal of Jews. I think it should be to be Jewish.
I'm both like very I'm both very inspired by that answer and frankly like nervous by it because I think creating an arc is another way of saying like self-ghettoize, and I'm
But
nervous
here's the
about
thing,
that.
the ark doesn't have to be locked to non-Jews, right? Like, nor do you have to spend all your time in the ark. Like that, and that's a good pushback. I should workshop this metaphor more. That's very helpful.
We're doing it right now.
I know, we're doing it now. This is great.
Yeah.
This is great. Thank you. I mean, the ark is kind of like, when it's storming, like that's where you live, but you should also like leave the ark. The ark is what gives you strength and community and difference. That's where you get your roots. That's where you get your sturdiness. And then you go out into the world. And I want Jews to share their traditions with others, not to proselytize, please, but to share our wisdom. And I want Jews to get the wisdom of others as well.
Yep.
I think that's really, really important. But again, if we're all doing the like, I'm just a cultural Jew, haha, I love Seinfeld, like I'm not sure what we're sharing. And by the way, you can't really fight anti-Semitism with a contentless Jewish identity, because if someone says like, the Jewish God is violent and vengeful and Judaism's about law, not love, if you don't know Jewish tradition, are you going to be like, my bubby made kugel? Like, how is that like a response? Or like, if someone's like, Israel is, like an illegitimate country, blah, 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 blah. If you don't know Jewish history, if you don't know Israel's history, you can't be like, but I love Tikkun Olam. Like, that's just not an answer to people's concerns. So I think that even to fight anti-Semitism, you need deep, rich Judaism.
Yeah, and so your arc is not just, I think you're qualifying your arc in two ways. Number one is it's not just like a escape, it's a refuge, but one that is porous. And then you're also saying you can't just sit in the ark, you actually have to like learn while you're in the ark.
Yes.
Yeah.
This arc metaphor is now seeming not great. I think I need to, I appreciate, this is good workshopping. I appreciate the feedback.
On that note, I'll ask you one more question, then we can move to audience questions, which were pre-submitted. You actually just mentioned your friend Dara Horn, and she says Judaism has always been uncool, going back to the origins as the planet's only monotheism. You talk about that a little bit, and then she writes, uncoolness is pretty much Judaism's brand. And so
Great quote.
And then kind of the end of your book really is like encouraging us to be uncool, and which is like bold and great for me. But
Same. This is very self-interested, by the way.
But
It's never cool.
but yeah, tell me what you mean by that.
So I think that Jewish tradition has a tremendous amount of radical and incredibly countercultural wisdom that our society desperately needs today. And I'll give a few examples of things that I've been thinking about, particularly lately. The first is that, I think we have a kind of moral vision that our society desperately needs. And here's what I mean by that. There's this old anti-Semitic lie that says that, Christianity is a religion of love and Judaism is a religion of law. It is legalistic, weedy, nitpicky. And, that's not true. Shai Held has written an extraordinary book about it, literally entitled Judaism is About Love. Very worth reading. But, if you actually study Jewish law, what you realize is that through its weediness and nitpickiness, it is actually articulating a very high bar for love and then teaching you how to meet it. So I'll give you some examples. If we are told in Jewish law that if you walk into a store and you have no intention of buying anything, you shouldn't ask the shopkeeper the price of an item. Because if you do that, you're wasting their time, right? You're getting their hopes up. It's not fair. We're also told that if you've loaned money to someone and a few weeks later you see them coming down the street towards you and they're still struggling and can't afford to repay you, you should actually walk the other way. You should actually avoid running into them. Now you could say oh, please, why these hyper-specific scenarios? And trust me, there are billions of them. This is if you spend time with Jewish texts, it's this person and this particular thing, and they're so hyper-specific. Why not just say help the poor? Why not just say be nice to workers? But the specificity is the point. With each hyper-specific little situation, Jewish law is trying to inculcate in you an exquisite sensitivity to the needs and dignity and humanity to that individual person. It's like going to the eye doctor where they click that little vision machine and they make your vision sharper and sharper so that you can see what is before you more clearly. And every situation is trying to get you to see this person and all their humanity and vulnerability. And I think that kind of thinking is the exact opposite of the kind of thinking we often see today, which says, no. You divide people up into two crude, dehumanizing categories, powerful, powerless, oppressor, oppressed, right side of history, wrong side of history, and then you love or hate them accordingly. End of story. That's like clicking the vision machine backwards until everything is so blurry, all you can see are two big blobs. And I don't think it's a great kind of moral vision. So I think Judaism really offers a challenge to that. The second thing I'll say is that Jewish law very much operates in polarities, which is you're kind of demanded and called to hold two totally opposing truths and wrestle with them, which is exhausting. The Torah tells us no fewer than 36 times, you love the stranger. You love the non-Israelite, the person who is not part of your group. You love them, you care for them. It's almost excessive how much we're told that thing. We're also told never forget Amalek, right? Which is the tribe that attacked the Israelites when they were wandering through the desert, and they attacked from the back. So the weakest members of the tribe who were kind of trailing behind, which is really kind of a terrible crime. And that's telling us, well, wait a second, there are people out there who are not part of your group who want to kill you, who are actually dangerous. So we're told, be open-hearted, be compassionate, be welcoming, but also be wary. Also be careful. So it's don't be brutal, but don't be naive, as I think Yossi Klein Halevi, the journalist, I think he put it that way. That's hard, right? So many people want to just go to one pole or the other, and you can't. Social media is like a festival of people clinging to their one pole, and that's just not Jewish. I'm sorry, it's just not, and I see it in the Jewish community too, and there's really nothing Jewish about that. We have to balance justice and compassion, kindness and honesty. Again and again, you see our ancient rabbis grappling with this, and they often don't come to a conclusion. They're often well, okay, it's not very satisfying. The last thing I'll say is that, I think our modern secular culture really is horrified and disgusted by things like grief, death, dying, illness, aging. We really think oh God, those are disturbing things. We need to run from them. Just run away from them. Hospitals creep us out. Dead bodies, we don't want to be near them. Aging, please just Botox that. If someone's sick, just send some flowers, send a text. So uncomfortable. Jewish tradition says the exact opposite. It says, no, you run right to those spaces. You get your body to the hospital bedside. You get your body to that funeral, to that shiva where you sit with those mourners and you be with them. you prepare that body for burial. You actually sit with that body and you pray a prayer of forgiveness over that body before you prepare it for burial to make sure that it feels respected, right? To think about our loved ones being, loved into death as they were loved into life. It's very profound. These are these liminal thin spaces where the boundaries between life and death and heaven and earth thin out, and they're very disorienting, right? Like we don't want to be in those spaces. They feel dangerous, they feel risky and unsafe, and the secular world is like, yep, don't go near. They are indeed unsafe, risky, bad, 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 run away. But Judaism says actually those are the deepest waters of life, and no one should be swimming in them alone, right? Like they should be accompanied and held by a loving community. And I think we need a lot more of that in our modern society. I think we've lost that. And I think Judaism really provides this profound challenge to much of our secular ethics. And there's so many more aspects of Jewish tradition that we desperately need now, not just Jews, but our society. And I think, just as thousands of years ago, we had this great idea about monotheism and everyone being created in God's image, which, by the way, what that means is that we're all infinitely worthy. You can't put a price on a human life. That is the idea that underlies democracy, human rights law, liberalism. It's a really good idea. And there's a lot more where that came from. And so I think Judaism still has something to say to the world. And I think very few Jews know what that is. Because again, the Protestant cookie cutter, right? We're kind of reckoning with that decision that we made as we entered modernity. And I think we need to have that reckoning.
And for you, uncool, bringing it back to that, I mean, in a way, it's almost the thesis of your book, right? Because to be cool means to fit in with the majority culture. And I think in a way your book is kind of like an exhortation to Jews, which is like, don't give in to that pressure to fit in. There's actually something beautiful you gain by not fitting in.
Yeah. And I'm torn about this because on the one hand, I want to critique our yearning for comfort that we fought so hard for in America. We fought so hard to fit in. And I do want our kids to fit in. I don't want a kid to have to sit through a Christian prayer in the morning at public school. That's not fair. I don't want a Muslim kid or a Hindu kid or a Buddhist kid either, right? That's not what I want. Let's be clear. So there is really, I don't want to give up that fight for inclusion and comfort. I do feel that tension, but I also worry about us getting too comfortable. I think we then begin to kind of lose what we have to offer the world, and there's some balance there. And I think there's kind of the pendulum swinging maybe to another extreme, which isn't so great, and we're going to have to do some rebalancing.
I'll ask a few audience-submitted, pre-submitted questions. Sorry, no monologues tonight.
I know, no one gets to give a speech, sorry.
So the first is from Ben, and we're going to just go real softball on this first one, but I actually love this question. Who is the most surprising person to tell you that they read and loved Here All Along, your first book?
Oh, I love that question. I really wrote my first book for Jews like me. For Jews who had grown up without much Jewish background, and I wanted to be like, guys, there's so much here that we didn't know about, surprise, read about it, yay. And so I really thought, that's my audience. What totally shocked me were the number of, very traditional, very learned Jews who were like, hey, this book was for me. I had Chabad rabbis say that to me, and I was like, oh no, it definitely definitely was not. But what was interesting is they were like, okay, let's be real. Don't love how you practice, don't agree with many of the things you said, but I see your love for this tradition. I see that you love it as much as I do, and you kind of reminded me of some of the things I love, and you had 550 endnotes, so clearly you're a neurotic person who did your homework, and I see the effort that went into this, and that was really so lovely. Right, so I just remember being at the Shabbat dinner table of this really wonderful guy who was a very, very seriously, traditionally observant Jew who just really felt like the book spoke to him. And he was telling his family about it, who were all very, very observant. And I was like, this is not in any way what I expected, but I loved it. And I know someone actually remarked to me, they said, your acknowledgement section of your first book is just wild because it's a group of rabbis who have never been together on a page. There's rabbis who say that who call themselves, they say I'm an ultra-Orthodox rabbi, and I had Reform rabbis, and I had secular, I just had such a diversity because all of them are my friends, right? And we don't agree on lots of stuff, but I've learned a lot from them, and we yell at each other a lot. That's okay, and so that was very, very surprising to me, but also really awesome.
grateful to be one of your rabbi friends.
You definitely are.
I know I'm your favorite. Don't answer that. Okay, Jojo asks, as a convert, I felt how words like shiksa can make those choosing Judaism feel unseen and dismissed. In your work on Jewish identity and belonging, how can we widen the tent to truly welcome future Ruths, love that, so that they feel fully seen and embraced?
I love this question. I mean, I think the first thing is that we should actually study our tradition, which is very clear about its embrace of Jews by choice. Very, very clear. Like Ruth, who she mentioned, is considered the model of Jews by choice. And she was the grandmother, right, of King David, who is like the most, one of the most renowned Jewish leaders. She's considered one of like the greats in Jewish history, right? And she was a convert. So I think like the way that Judaism really like holds up people, Jews by choice, I think like I'm talking like way back in tradition. This is very much part of Jewish tradition. So I think we need to do a little bit more learning about that, because I think there are many Jews who are still a touch confused about the value of Jews by choice in our tradition and how highly in esteem that they're held. I also think we need to do a little bit of education about like what Judaism is, because I think there's some real confusion about this. There's this idea sometimes that like Judaism, actually, there's this amazing book called Jews and Words by Amos Oz and Fania Oz-Salzberger, and it's just lovely. And at one point they say something that I quote in my book where they say, ours is not a bloodline, but a text line. And I think some Jews are a little bit confused, thinking that Judaism is only a bloodline. And if you are not part of that bloodline, you are not authentically Jewish. That it is incorrect. I don't know how to say it more bluntly. There are just countless examples throughout Jewish history and halakha tradition that say that that's not true. And even if it was a bloodline, like how depressing. This is something I learned from you. Like if that's all this is, like then why bother, right? We are a text line. We have this long, beautiful tradition of wisdom that is very inspiring to me, because I think no matter how different we are as Jews, no matter how differently we practice, no matter what we think about Israel, that text line is like our shared DNA, right? That text line is something that we can all return to. And yes, we're never going to agree on how to understand those texts, but like that is the thing that I think holds us together. And so I want Jews to understand that, and to understand the central value of Jews by choice in our tradition. And I think there actually needs to be a lot more learning and study about that.
Not to use your own book to quote at you, but I'll add on to your answer with another line that really stood out to me in your book, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but you say something like, I wish all born Jews knew as much as Jews by choice, which was such an awesome line. And so, yeah, just lifting that up also.
It's like with American citizenship, right? To become an American citizen, you have to study all this history. These people who become American citizens, they know so much that the average American is totally ignorant of. Yeah. And Jews by choice are like the most learned, educated Jews, because they had to take a really serious class to become a Jew. So I wish every Jew were as knowledgeable as the average Jew by choice.
Yeah. Last but not least, Leah or Leah, sorry, I don't know how you pronounce your name. The women in my family lost touch with many Jewish traditions after coming from Poland through Ellis Island before the Holocaust. My great-grandparents were in survival mode, working at their family-owned diner during Shabbat to make ends meet. Generations later, I feel called to revive Jewish traditions for myself and my future family. How can I include my mother and grandmother on my journey to reconnect with those traditions without overstepping?
Wow, what a beautiful question. First of all, how wonderful. I don't know, I find this very moving. Go you, Leah. I think the first thing is to really approach your ancestors with compassion. I think it's very easy for us to judge choices that our ancestors made. And I think, originally when I was reading about this period in Western Europe in the 1800s, I really felt this judgment. Why are they so condescending about Judaism? Why are they trashing it? Why don't they get it? How dare they? They were bathed in this anti-Judaism, right? How could they have done otherwise? And, hearing about her family, it's like they were trying to live, right? They were trying to make a life and to give their kids and grandkids the things that many of us take for granted. So I think having some real compassion for our ancestors, for the very real obstacles and struggles they faced, and for the fact that because they struggled, we have this luxury today. She has the privilege to reclaim this because of them. So I think kind of grounding this exercise in some real both compassion and profound gratitude, and actually coming to her mom and grandmother and being I'm just so grateful to our ancestors. They gave us this gift, and I feel like we have this like privilege, and I would love us together to just try to take advantage of it. Like, I'm kind of curious. Here are some things I'm thinking. Like, what do you think? Right? As opposed to like, our ancestors sucked, and we're gonna fix this problem they created, and here's what we're gonna do. I think kind of really regarding it as this like gift from our ancestors and as a shared project of being able to enjoy gifts and blessings that they weren't able to enjoy, but that they kind of won for us with their sacrifice and their service. I think approaching it with that kind of compassion and love and curiosity, I think is probably a good place to start.
Beautiful. Sarah Hurwitz, it is such a joy to get to talk to you.
Thank you,
even if
friend.
it's a little weird in front of all these people.
Thank you all.
Thank you for being here. Thank you to all of you for being here. To those watching virtually, it's been a real honor.
Thank you,
guys. Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Sarah Hurwitz and Rabbi Aaron.